I'm going to try not to just recommend blindly every single Billy Wilder film I've seen on this episode, but I might.
Welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year. Today's film is from 1944, Double Indemnity, from director Billy Wilder, starring Fred MacMurray and Barbara Stanwyck, and Edward G. Robinson. Andrew, where did you watch Double Indemnity?
I bought a copy for myself.
I do not blame you. It is a great film. I rented it on Amazon, I think. It's currently not streaming anywhere. You can always check our show notes to see if it is streaming somewhere for free or for a subscription. But yeah, I rented it. All right, let's talk about the year 1944, Andrew.
I'm excited. Where are we in the war?
Well, World War II seems to be heading toward a conclusion and a clear victory for the Allied forces. This year you have D-Day in the summer. Paris is liberated in August. And before the end of the year, the Nazis are kicked out of France. Then you have the Soviet Union successfully break the siege of Leningrad. This was an 872-day siege. The Nazis had been waging it since 1941. Russian forces helped free Poland, Rome is liberated, and in the Pacific, Allied forces cut off important supply routes and liberate more territory from the Japanese. In the Japanese Navy's desperation, you start to see those infamous kamikaze attacks. Very late in the year, the Germans launch a counterattack against the Allies with the Battle of the Bulge, but they'll lose that battle in January of next year. With all this going on, you might miss that Gandhi was released from prison in India, and that FDR was elected to a fourth term as president of the United States. But what about the film industry? Is there anything you want to point out going on in cinema this year or this time period?
This is right around the time when, in the Hollywood film system, deep staging started to become a more common practice. And deep staging, all that means is really long, prolonged shots that would show the full geography of a location. If you want to think of deep staging, a great film to think of it as an example is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, in which the film subconsciously sort of takes you on a tour of the hotel throughout the sequences. Double Indemnity is actually one of the examples of that. There are several very long takes in this film. And deep staging in general is sort of seen as one of the main, as far as form goes, pivots into how film noir became such a popular genre.
And I think specifically about the opening shot where we see the inside of the insurance building when our hero first kind of stumbles in, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good segue into talking about Double Indemnity. And what is this movie about?
So Double Indemnity is about a man played by Fred MacMurray. I think his name is Neff.
An insurance salesman in Los Angeles.
Yes, he's selling insurance and stumbles across his femme fatale, played by Barbara Stanwyck. And they hatch a plan to murder her husband. Considered pretty revolutionary for the time, honestly, showing the plotting and scheming and the exact details of how to murder somebody on film was something that was pretty new to Hollywood at the time.
They're trying to kill the husband in order to collect on his life insurance from the death. And specifically, they're trying to kill him in such a way that they get twice as much money. That's double indemnity. That's
the double indemnity clause.
Specifically that if he falls off the train, then they get twice as much money.
They kill the husband. They think they've gotten away scot-free. And they think they've got the insurance money. And then more and more details begin to unravel around the case until our protagonist feels that he can't trust anybody, including the femme fatale who he is in on this with. They have a showdown in her house. They both shoot each other. And does he die?
Oh, I think he's dead.
It's sort of left, in a weird way, it's left to interpretation because his boss seems to think that if he calls an ambulance, he could be healed. But it does also seem like he could definitely be dead by the end. And it's just a really tragic drama.
It's very dark, very moody. He could have just not had him fall off the train and all of this could have been avoided. You know, the other insurance salesman back at the office would have been like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this. But as soon as it's like, oh man, he just happened to sign this life insurance and then a week later falls off a train. Something suspicious about this.
I think the reason that they did the whole train thing was because Single Indemnity would have been a horrible title.
No, I think it's just funny because, you know, the guy takes all these precautions to not get caught and then just makes the silliest slip up, just makes it so obvious that he was killed.
I thought the plan was pretty tight. I feel like it does unravel in a realistic way, but if there hadn't have been a witness on the back of the train, I think they would have gotten away with it.
Yeah. I think the guy back at the office, Keys, would still have suspicions, but right, he would not have been able to unravel the case like he did.
Yeah.
But it's a tense story. It's really, really engaging. If you can't tell, I liked this film a lot. Thought it was really entertaining. Film noir as a genre is always just a lot of fun. Very cinematic. And yeah, I mean, I was on the edge of my seat, even though, you know pretty much what's going to happen because it's all being told in flashback. You see that the guy is back in his office telling how everything's going to go to hell. So you know it's going to go to hell, but you're still like, man, I hope they get away with it.
Yeah, this film for me was kind of on a personal list of shame. I've been a very big fan of Billy Wilder for a long time. I first saw Sunset Boulevard when I was in high school, the same time I saw All About Eve, and I followed trajectories from both those movies into a bunch of other classic films, and Double Indemnity was on my watch list for so long, and you know, time just sort of passes and things just sort of happen, and I don't know, now we're 11 years past all of that, and I never watched it.
So really quick, the other Billy Wilder films, for people who are listening back home who don't know, what other Billy Wilder films are there that they might know of?
Probably his most famous is Some Like It Hot. Really funny comedy starring Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis and Marilyn Monroe. And The Apartment, Sunset Boulevard, Ace in the Hole. He has a lot of films that are considered to be the classic canon. And this is honestly considered one of his major films. But he also did Sabrina with Audrey Hepburn. The Lost Weekend, which is allegedly about his relationship with his co-writer on this film. There's a lot of interesting things about Billy Wilder's career.
And even at the time, this was considered an incredible film that was making waves in Hollywood. I'll link to a Variety review, a review from the time like we always do, but critics and people in Hollywood were just lavishing praise on Double Indemnity. There were ads taken out and wars being fought in the press over this film and other films and all sorts of fun things kind of going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of like studio politics that you can see going on, kind of dramatic and just as interesting as the film itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was trying to find the interview with Alfred Hitchcock where he said something to the effect of the two words that have changed the film industry are double indemnity. Something to that effect. So to pull a few points from the Variety review, Joseph Sistrom, that's the producer, has contributed a grade A production. They specifically mention Billy Wilder's direction as the main credit for why the film is so suspenseful and has a great, consistently well-developed pace. And he also co-authored the screenplay. There's 3 people attached to this screenplay.
List them off.
So there's the author of the original novella that this was based on, James M. Cain, who was actually, I don't know if he wrote a script or if he wrote a treatment, and that was being shopped around Hollywood earlier in the 30s. And there was actually an enormous bidding war between all the studios to try and get it.
To my knowledge, that was just the novel itself was being bidded around as something to be bought to be turned into a script.
Okay.
Then, yes, the Hayes office said absolutely not.
Right, and Breen, our friend Breen back at the Hayes office said nope, and then all the studios withdrew their bids, and James M. Cain actually said that he lost out on a ton of money because, lo and behold, the rights were bought just a couple years later, and it was turned into a movie.
Yes, the rights were bought for $10,000 less than what he had originally been told they could be sold for. And so he says that Breen owes him $10,000.
I guess it's also worth noting that this story was based on a real story of a woman and her boyfriend trying to murder the husband for an insurance payout. That happened in the 1920s. And they were actually caught like right away. And then that inspired the novella.
Did they succeed in killing him?
Yes, they did. Except for the guy was not in on the insurance business. They just wanted the insurance money.
Maybe he was, and the insurance business didn't want us to know about that.
They wanted to uphold their reputation with the public. I mean,
this is a century ago, you know, it's all, we can say anything we want about it now.
They were both tried and convicted and sentenced to death. And the woman was put in the electric chair, and there was actually a secret photo that was taken of her execution. Obviously, you're not allowed to just take pictures of people being executed, but a journalist snuck a small camera in on their ankle and took a very horrifying picture of this woman being electrocuted.
Wow. And that will be shown on our Facebook page. No, I'm just kidding.
And then, of course, Billy Wilder is credited for the screenplay. And then a man named Raymond Chandler, an author, a mystery author.
Yes. So first with James M. Cain, I've read 2 books from him, The Postman Always Rings Twice and Mildred Pierce, both of which are phenomenal books. Do you read much in the way of pulp fiction?
I'm not that kind of person. I don't read. I watch movies.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding.
You know, if I were to recommend you a pulp novel, the one I would recommend would be Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett.
Okay.
That is the book that Yojimbo is allegedly based on, but that's all just background noise. The book itself is so entertaining and so fun. Mildred Pierce is a great book. I actually read that book as part of a different podcast that I was on. He's a really fantastic writer. He's really good at getting that pulp across, of really making you feel driven by the story. And what's interesting to me about both Mildred Pierce and Double Indemnity, they both set themselves up with framing devices that are not present in the novels. James M. Cain actually went on record saying that he wished he had thought of the framing device of the main character speaking into a dictaphone throughout the whole story. Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
So Chandler and Wilder hated each other, apparently, as they were writing this.
For those who are wondering, Raymond Chandler wrote the books that, they are called these titles as well, but The Big Sleep, Farewell, My Lovely, and The Long Goodbye. He wrote the original novels for those. Chandler was an alcoholic, a very intense alcoholic. He was in AA when they started, and then as the process went forward, he started drinking more and more.
Right. I feel like that's not the only reason they weren't getting along. Since he's not in the studio system, since he is kind of this outside author who's usually doing pulp novels, I can see plenty of situations and politics where they're just not getting along and not seeing eye to eye. But Wilder still says that tension that arose between them was part of the reason why this script turned out so good, because they were constantly working it and making sure that it was reaching higher and higher levels.
I loved the dialogue in this film. Definitely the biggest takeaway. You can tell Raymond Chandler wrote this dialogue. It sizzles. And what is the whole thing?
There's like a page of dialogue where they're going back and forth on like, suppose I go 95 miles per hour.
Yeah,
Suppose you're going 45 miles per hour. Suppose I give you a ticket. Suppose I throw it back at you.
I thought that was all so good. That's the best like conversation about sex you could have during the Hays Code era.
It embodies that film noir genre.
Yeah, this is the quintessential noir film. It's kind of the one that proved they could be successful and good.
Some of that dialogue, I mean, James Cain, the original author of the novella, I understand some of his original dialogue from his book made it into the script.
So, as far as I know, some of it did, but for the most part, Billy Wilder wanted it to all be in the film, and it was Raymond Chandler who said that dialogue won't work for a movie. So, that was one of their big spouts, was Billy Wilder saying Raymond Chandler didn't know what he was talking about. So they got actors together to do a cold reading of dialogue from the book, and Billy Wilder was shocked to realize that Raymond Chandler was correct, that the dialogue wasn't working. And that was when they really started to work all the time together, and they took a lot of time to write the script, and Chandler wrote a lot of the dialogue.
Anyways, we should talk about casting, because no one cares about writers. People want to know about Barbara Stanwyck.
That's why they're all alcoholics, Arthur. That's true.
I was just watching Sunset Boulevard because it's such a great double feature with this film.
Yes.
But man, that film just craps on writers the whole time. I love it.
Yeah, it's a very sad film, but it's so entertaining. And I mean, it's not just on writers, it's the whole Hollywood system. It's so evil in that film.
Yeah, Sunset Boulevard is like a really good deconstruction of the psychological damage that happens, not just with actors, but with everyone involved with the film industry. You see, the reader, the writer, even the producers don't seem particularly happy, the crew. It's all just a whole mess. I love Sunset Boulevard.
Double Indemnity.
Barbara Stanwyck. Last time we saw Barbara Stanwyck on our list, she was in Babyface early in her career. Now, she is the highest paid woman in America. She is a Hollywood star through and through.
Babyface was a big jump forward for her, and this film is... this is such an insane performance from her. It's interesting because it's so easily comparable to Babyface, because it is about this woman who kind of has this very determined mindset and wants something and is not going to let anything get in her way.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
But at the same time, in Babyface, she is such a hero. And I'm not saying I don't root for her in this film, but she just... especially in the ending, she really does end up turning quite nasty.
It's funny because she didn't originally want this part. She refused to play in this film because she thought that the character was nasty. She didn't want that sort of reputation going forward. The small differences are important. She was playing a lot of people you would look up to.
Right. I think the main thing is in Babyface, the ending is she ends up going off with the man she loves after he survives his suicide attempt, and all the money goes away and she doesn't care. And at the end of this one, she just wants the money and she's willing to kill for it.
Right.
There's not much to redeem her. But he's also a sleazebag.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Fred MacMurray had been playing in comedy roles before this, apparently. And he was also concerned about his reputation after getting into this picture. Because he didn't want to be seen as, I think the exact term he used was a heel. He didn't want to be seen as a heel. Just this untrustworthy, reprehensible sort of dude.
Yeah, the film I know him from the most is actually The Absent-Minded Professor, which came out way after this. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
Have you ever seen Flubber with Robin Williams?
Oh, is it a precursor to Flubber?
Flubber is a remake of The Absent-Minded Professor. It's about a guy who invents this substance Flubber, and he's able to make his car fly, and he's able to bounce everywhere. It's really cute and fun, and I loved it when I was a kid. But yeah, watching him in this is such a turnaround. And even the character he plays in The Apartment, he's skeezy and bad, but he's not plotting. In fact, he's kind of stupid and unaware. But in this film, he is really sharp. He's trying to get this money, and he wants it so bad.
Yeah, kind of psychopathic for sure. Knows every single little detail that he needs to be aware of for all of these crimes. He's been thinking about this for a while, this character.
I loved the monologue where he's talking about how motivating him wasn't his love for her at all. It was the fact that he had been thinking for so long on how you could crack the system, and he was finally going to get a chance to do it.
So a lot of people, a lot of actors were sort of hesitant to get in on this film because of its sort of morbid reputation. You know, the Hayes office was saying that this couldn't be made at one point. Yeah, even the guy playing Keyes, Edward Robinson, was a little hesitant to take this role, not because the subject was morbid or anything like that, but because up until now he had been playing usually the lead role. I know he was in gangster movies like Little Caesar, but that was all the way back in 1930. At this point in his career, he was kind of coming to terms with the fact that he would have to play the secondary character like this. But it's sort of like the situation with Cary Grant in The Awful Truth, where all these people were kind of hesitant to take their roles, but this ends up being the film that really defines a lot of their careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy Wilder was a gigolo. He was.
Oh yeah, you gonna tell us about that story?
Well, he was Austrian Jewish. His parents owned, I think it was a bakery at a train station, and they wanted him to take over the family business. He never did. He moved to Hollywood, and he immediately started working on films and working on scripts. This was his third film that he directed, but it was the first where he had real creative control. And yeah, in between all of that, he was a gigolo.
You know, LA's a tough city.
I respect it, honestly. I think that it shows in his films. His films always contain something about the really dark, seedy side of culture and America. And I think it's because he's seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I love that aspect of the film noir genre as a whole. But definitely in his films, like the gloss of LA is sort of on show. It's displayed. LA looks really pretty in a lot of these films.
Yes.
You have the, Spanish revival houses and everything. You have the bright sunny days, but very quick to get in under the surface and really showcase the psychological horror lying right beneath the surface.
And, we're still a few years away from the term film noir even being coined by Nino Frank in France. And even once that happens, it doesn't catch on as a genre for a long time. And this film is considered to pretty much be sort of a definition of it to a certain extent. He has a really strong recurring theme of unlikable protagonists, but the world around them is somehow even more unlikable to the point that you have no choice but to sort of root for them. And that's a very common theme in film noir as well. It's always a very complicated, hard to understand protagonist, but they're up against such a cruel, harsh world that we as an audience relate to, that we root for them, even though we don't agree with everything they do. And that's something Billy Wilder would do in all of his films, including the ones that are not film noir. I mean, yeah, he worked successfully for over 5 decades, making films that people loved all the way up to the end.
Yeah, just working the studio system. Looks like he was at Paramount Pictures for most of it.
I mean, he died at the age of 97.
Jeez.
Oh, he died of pneumonia. Oh, at the age of 95. But still, that's such a good age.
That's a successful little life, yeah.
Yes. he did it.
So we keep talking about film noir. What are some of the tropes and cliches that you see in Double Indemnity, Andrew?
The framing devices, the femme fatale as a character, the long takes.
I mean, definitely when I think of film noir, I think of the look of it. There's obviously the storytelling elements and everything, but there's the really dark shadows. There's especially like the Venetian blinds. And that's all sort of established in this film from the director of photography, John Seitz. Seitz?
Seats.
Sorry, John. But he's from the German school of filmmaking. See a lot of our old friendly genre, German expressionism, coming into film noir as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of really cool influences going on in this film, and I love the Venetian stuff, especially whenever he's inside the office. It's so good how the stripes will go across his outfits and on his face. It makes him look like he's already a prisoner, even when he's trying to convince other people. You kind of already know what his fate is going to be because the lighting is saying, look, he's already been caught. All of the sets looked so good.
And apparently Billy Wilder would go around the sets and overturn ashtrays in order to give them a sleazy, lived-in look.
That's pretty good. That's what I should do in my home.
But yeah, importantly, I mean, with a lot of this sort of theory stuff, it's all these rules and sort of tropes are identified later on. And Billy Wilder said at the time, you know, they weren't trying to make a genre. They weren't trying to make a quote unquote film noir. They were just doing what they thought was right for the story. And then, you know, it was incredibly influential and you start to see it everywhere.
Exactly. That's what makes the film so impressive, is that it really is the basis of this whole movement that it had no intentions of being.
Yeah, the film just became such a runaway success, and this kind of lighting is pretty easy to pull off. Like, you need one hard source and some shadows that look a little strange, a lot of darkness. You don't need to light the whole set, and you can get away with a lot. So you start to see this look show up all over the place.
Yeah, and I love the transition of the house when we see it during the day to when we see it at night near the end.
Yes. Chekhov's gun at the end there when she hides it in the couch. That's just great suspense. That's something right out of Hitchcock. And apparently they had to start shooting each other because the Hayes office was like, you can't just have people get away with this. And they need to. They need to die on screen. They need to be punished.
Yeah, I'm almost disappointed that there isn't some crazy ending where she gets the electric chair and a journalist snaps a photo of it. But I guess that would just be too heavy.
Do you know about the original ending they filmed with the guy being executed in a gas chamber?
No.
So they filmed this. It doesn't exist anymore. You can't find the film stock anywhere, but apparently it was in some cut. It was almost ready to go. But the ending that they have where Keyes lights Neff's cigarette after everything that happened, just felt like such a good conclusion that that's what Billy Wilder wanted to stick with. Was that moment between the two of them.
Yeah, it's a great ending. And man, just so weird to think about this film having anything to do with gas chambers right around this time period. Yeah. I feel like her repenting is sort of a Hays Code thing, too. It's them trying to say, look, she saw the error of her ways.
I didn't even believe her when she was saying all that.
Oh,
no.
That's exactly how I feel about it, is that it feels like she's trying one last move and it doesn't work. From all sources, it was meant to be genuine, but I don't think it's interpreted as genuine today.
Because it plays better this way.
It's true.
I think the only thing we didn't touch on in your points, which are excellent points, by the way.
Thank you.
is what about this film felt so scandalous? What was the Hays Code so up in arms about?
I can definitely see how this film doesn't seem to fit any sort of moral code. I don't think
fits Ayn Rand's code. Get money.
I don't see it as pure nihilism, but it has a nihilistic touch to it where things seem to be, for the most part, superfluous and it all is only going to end one way no matter what. And I think that is a scary mentality for people, especially for something that might be very popular.
Yes, and I think that the central love story feels so hollow. It doesn't even feel like a Bonnie and Clyde situation where I do feel like there's some actual attraction there between the two of them. I don't feel like these two love each other. When Neff is constantly saying baby, baby, baby to her, it's like he's almost trying to convince himself and her that they're in some sort of relationship, even though it's like what you're supposed to say to someone you love out of necessity.
No, it's so interesting because he tries to convince himself through his inner monologue that he was doing this out of a certain love for her. But then even he starts to realize, I didn't do this out of love. I did this because I wanted to screw over the insurance system. And truly, you know, again, folding into the whole Billy Wilder theme, I think people are familiar enough with the insurance system that they know how skeezy and horrible it is. And we also want to see somebody screw over the insurance system.
Yes. And if they have to kill an oil man in order to do it, so be it. You know?
Yeah. And convincing an audience to root for somebody who is planning out a murder. Because again, as I said earlier, there really weren't a lot of examples of fully planned out murders happening in Hollywood movies up to this point, of two people scheming it, putting it together, and executing it.
Yeah, we don't see the strangulation in the car, but that's almost worse. Like, we see Barbara Stanwyck's reaction to it as it's happening off screen. We just hear it.
She looks so pleased.
Yeah, she's totally chill with it happening. It's pretty dark. So yeah, I can see why the Hayes office was a little, cautious about the idea of this film.
Now, Arthur, if you and I were to plot to kill somebody, where would we meet? Because I don't want it to be at a grocery store.
If I were going to a grocery store and you see two people acting like that, just hanging around,
back to back,
out,
but never leaving each other and whispering as if, yeah. And that woman asking for them to grab the baby food, so funny. We also both watched a Carol Burnett sketch about this,
which is worth putting in the show notes. Like, it's too funny.
Yes, it's called Double Calamity, and that old woman coming into the grocery store and having to tell the other person what the other person said was so funny. And then she says, "Oh, I hope she didn't hear us," after she's just explained the whole thing to the other person. Them shooting each other over and over and over again was so funny. There were so many parts in that, especially the performance of the daughter. I thought, wow, it's not at all what happened in the movie, but it's at the same time exactly what happened in the movie. And I don't know how to explain it. But the daughter just being this crying girl who won't stop screaming. I thought, that's exactly what happened.
Like, the movie's really tense and suspenseful and everything, but it's still so sort of outdated with its tropes and cliches that you can laugh at this movie.
Yeah, there's room to laugh at it and still appreciate it as the great film that it is. I was very entertained by it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's going to be good.
Oh my god. Oh, wait. We have to say this. We're a quarter of the way there.
Oh yeah.
Film 25, baby.
Film 25, baby.
Baby.
Well, congratulations, Andrew. We are a quarter of the way through. I've learned so much, I've got to say.
And we will continue to learn more.
What are we going to learn from next week?
Next week, we're watching Roberto Rossellini's Rome, Open City, one of the great war films.
with 45 being the end of World War II, I thought that it was appropriate.
The trilogy as a whole is very much worth your time, but I love Rome Open City.
Wait a minute, there's a trilogy?
This is the first one. You're fine.
Okay.
But yes, Rossellini has a war trilogy, and this is the first one. And also my personal favorite.
Nice. And we'll have where you can find that streaming or to rent online in the show notes, as always. I'm going to bet, though, that it's on the Criterion channel.
Yes. And I also have it, a physical copy. So
cool. So everyone can come by your place and just grab it.
Exactly. The sequel series to A Century in Cinema will be just us watching a war film from every single year. Until we like them.
Do you like war films?
I won't lie, it is the toughest genre for me. There are films I've seen, Canal, for instance, one of my favorite movies. Patton, I think, is a fantastic film. I've seen many great war movies, but for some reason, if that is the genre right off the bat, my interest goes down a few points.
I think mine does too. I used to like war movies a lot more, I think, like in high school when I was getting into cinema and movies and just watching more of them in general. But, you know, as you start to explore more of film history, you start to realize that there's just better movies out there. A lot of war films really feel like propaganda. You kind of brush up against that a little too much for me.
Yeah, I will always love something like Full Metal Jacket, which just completely subverts what the whole war film is supposed to be. But I will also be honest and say, if that was not a Stanley Kubrick film, I don't know if I would have ever seen it. Yeah.
And even as I say that, you know, I still like a lot of war movies. You know, Thin Red Line is great.
Apocalypse Now.
Fantastic. You know, I like Dunkirk.
I do love Dunkirk.
I can definitely name war movies that I like and that are really well made. But yeah, the agenda behind a lot of them, which is, you know, ultimately patriotic and nationalistic, even when you agree with it, sometimes you're like, you know what, I'm just not in the mood.
Do you know who Andrzej Wajda is?
No.
It's a Polish film director, and he has a trilogy of war films. One I mentioned earlier, Canal, and another one is Ashes and Diamonds. If anyone feels like they don't like war films, those are two I would recommend. They're the war movie for people who don't like war movies.
Yeah, I think a lot of war movies are trying to present themselves as anti-war, but that becomes a big problem because, you know, the best parts of any war movie are like the really intricately staged battle scenes and the explosions and that's the fun stuff, right? So you kind of run into that problem.
The best film I watched last year during quarantine was Come and See, which is one of the most impressive war films I've ever seen. It's all told through the eyes of a child, and it's more, I would call it a horror film before I would call it a war movie. It's really well done. I've never seen anything that is that aggressive aesthetically to the point that I felt like I had to turn it down and warn my roommates what I was watching at certain points because it was so aggressive, but it was also just a complete masterpiece. I'm very rarely someone who says, oh, it's not a film I can watch, because honestly I can watch most films multiple times, even if they're very messed up. Come and See is the first film I've seen in a long time where I was like, I think I need to wait a little while before I watch this again. Because it was just such a horrifying experience. But I would recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing. If you do have a war film that is successfully anti-war, I mean, do you really want to be confronted with that on a Friday night? That doesn't. You didn't sell that movie to me. Like, it sounds like something that is admittedly very, very good, but maybe not something that I need right now in my life.
Maybe not right now. Maybe later.
But maybe later. Yeah, maybe later.
Ivan's Childhood. Great anti-war film that is not as aggressive. Also told through the eyes of a child. I would recommend Ivan's Childhood, too.
But yeah, that's just why war movies and the genre in general is a complicated one, and one that's sometimes hard to just sit down and watch.
Yeah, I really can't watch war films that are exploiting it all for entertainment as if it was like I'm here for the explosions and the big action sequences anymore, which is kind of, I don't know if it makes it into the edit or not, but one of the reasons I don't much care for Saving Private Ryan.
Right. And that's like a great example of that, right? Like the only, scenes anyone ever talks about are the crazy D-Day landing and the tank stuff at the end and all of that. That's the fun stuff.
When are we doing another color film? Did we decide we don't want to do those anymore?
Yeah, this is now a black and white only podcast.
I did think I was like, wow, we really did do Robin Hood, and then said, okay, well, that was too much. A sensory overload.
Technicolor film is a lot more rare. It's not like with talkies where everyone was just like, boom, we're going to only do talkies. We go over the whole process in that podcast. Like, it was an incredibly expensive, time-consuming thing that a large production had to invest in. And when you don't have that capital, it's not worth doing.
Okay, we should wrap this.
Yeah, we should wrap this. That was a incredibly smooth podcast that will require very little editing.
Yeah.
Good job, Andrew.
Good job, Arthur.
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.